We don't have to be afraid of the emerging technologies of genetic modification, brain-computer interfaces, or also digitalization. By realizing that we've always been cyborgs, that's a sort of a move away from the traditional understanding, that we are something outside of the world. It is the realization that we've always used technologies in order to improve the quality of our lives.
Le podcast
Humain demain.
Salut à tous chers abonnés, on se retrouve pour la série de podcasts Humain demain en collaboration avec l'AFT. Je vais être accompagné par Didier Kernel, vice-président de l'AFT. Et dans cet épisode, nous recevons Stefan Sorgner, un philosophe allemand, métahumaniste, transhumaniste. Il va nous expliquer un petit peu tout ça. Et je vous invite donc tout de suite à vous abonner à la chaîne YouTube et à suivre nos autres podcasts. Tout de suite, on va rentrer directement dans le vif du sujet. Juste un rappel, c'est un épisode qui est en anglais. Donc il y a des sous-titres pour la version YouTube. Et pour ceux qui l'écoutent sur les applications de podcast en audio avec leur téléphone, vous avez le devoir, je dirais, d'être bilingue. Sinon, vous n'allez pas comprendre grand-chose. Sans plus attendre, l'épisode en question, c'est parti. So thank you, Stefan, for accepting our invitation to talk about transhumanism and many other topics, I guess. On your Wikipedia page, it says you are a German metahumanist philosopher. So first of all, is it how you describe yourself? And if so, what does metahumanist means?
Thanks a lot for the question. I describe myself as metahumanist, also as a weak transhumanist in the sense. Metahumanist is a word which I coined together with a Spanish artist. And it basically means that we're applying sort of some continental philosophical aspects to transhumanism in order to develop it further, to approach a very distinctive approach. And the most important thing is here that, well, it's not a radical transhumanism which aims for mind uploading. It's not that idea of us, our personality, getting differentiated, getting uploaded, getting separated from the body. And I think I'm not excluding the possibility, but I think that's an aspect I'm rather critical of. I don't find it very plausible that this will happen in the forthcoming decades. I think there are other. It's not a central aspect of transhumanism either. So people like Kurzweil and others who sort of highlight that specific element, I think that's just not one of the pressing issues we should be concerned with, and that's an important part of metahumanism. But I also describe myself as a transhumanist. So it's a weak transhumanism, not in the sense of a strong transhumanism which aims for like a silicon-based transhumanism which aims for mind uploading. I think the most promising features for altering ourselves and for moving beyond the limitation of our current existence are gene technologies and our brain-computer interfaces, are all the different aspects of chips getting integrated into our bodies, because this is something we all, the majority of human beings regard as important for flourishing lives, is like the expansion of the human health span. An increased human health span. That's what the majority of people in some way identify with the flourishing lives. And this is really something which ought to be taken seriously on a political level. And this is something I am proposing.
Yes, so the interesting distinction between weak transhumanism based on, let's say, human body like we know, but enhanced and strong transhumanist that would be a brain in a box. And now, how do you make a distinction between post-humanism and transhumanism? For me, it's never been really clear.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is really quite a challenging issue, sort of, because as you rightly said, the word post-humanism is used differently in many different contexts. I know that sort of in France, very many people use post-humanism as a form of strong transhumanism in the sense of identifying it with mind uploading. I know that some use post-humanism in the sense as an embracing term, as a term of including critical post-humanism as well as transhumanism. I think there are not many transhumanists who use the word post-humanism in order to refer to sort of the idea of mind uploading. So I really distinguish between transhumanism on the one hand and post-humanism on the other hand. And transhumanism, which is what I think we all share, is sort of the idea of the idea of moving beyond our current limitations in order to increase our likelihood of living good lives. And post-humanism is related to critical post-humanism, which is a completely different tradition. It has to do with a continental philosophical approach. It's basically a further development of the philosophies of Foucault and Deleuze, and it has to do with the reconceptualization of who we are as human beings, and how we relate to the environment, how we relate to animals, and how we relate also to robots and to technologies. It doesn't primarily deal with the ethics of emerging technologies or state the use or regard it as beneficial to use enhancement for overcoming our limitations, but it has more the philosophical and academic aim of reconceptualizing us as human beings, as non-dualistic entities. I think the most plausible way, most widely shared way of using the term post-humanism, it is something which many transhumanists also embrace, which many transhumanists also put forward, because in transhumanism it goes back to Julian Huxley, who coined the term transhumanism in 1951. Many people falsely say it was first coined in a later book, in a monograph by Julian Huxley, New Bottles for New Wine. But actually it goes back to an article which he already published in 1951. The term was already used, by the way, earlier on by others, but this is not in tune with what we mean by transhumanism, how transhumanism is used nowadays. So Julian Huxley coined the term transhumanism in 1951. And he didn't aim for mind uploading. He was someone who was really interested in presenting an evolutionary humanism. So he basically identified evolutionary humanism and transhumanism, and he was using, and he coined both terms. And this also means that one of his essential moves was to differentiate his evolutionary humanism as a way where human beings are fully integrated into the world. There's not this categorical separation where the human nature is part of an immaterial soul which is separate from the sensually accessible world, but we humans are fully part of the human world, and we only differ by degree from other animals, from plants, from robots. And this is something actually where critical post-humanists and I think transhumanism have a lot in common. And this is also the reason why I coined the term metahumanism together with Jaime Del Val. So there's much more common ground in a certain respect between critical post-humanists and transhumanism than what is commonly believed. On the other hand, there are some radical forms of critical post-humanism, or of post-humanism as I use it, which I find highly problematic, because they really move into a direction which can intellectually not be, is highly implausible and cannot be properly justified. So that's why I'm also extremely critical of the radical stances quite a few critical post-humanists propose. But the important thing is it's a pedigree, it's the origin. So transhumanists go back to Julian Huxley, to this evolutionary understanding of who we are, and post-humanism really is a further development of the thinking of Deleuze and Foucault, and they have a more philosophical enterprise. Their main focus is not an ethical one, and so it is a cultural tradition, which is, I think, the main reason why it's important to distinguish between these two terms.
I've always thought post-humanism was some sort of thinking about the far future, and transhumanism was more in the next century or so. Because sometimes in for example, Nick Bostrom used the word post-human when he tried to describe the next stage of evolution. But it's also, as you said, something that is more on the postmodernist branch, maybe? Or?
Yes, and this is another important aspect. No, there are quite a few, transhumanism, you and I use the term post-human. It's a term post-human which is used. It's not the term post-humanism. There have been a few transhumanists who used the term post-humanism, but these were merely some exceptions. So the term post-human is actually used both in transhumanism as well as in critical post-humanism, in post-humanism. But what the term post-human stands for in transhumanism and in critical post-humanism, the meaning is significantly different. So in the term post-human in critical post-humanism is the attempt to redefine who we are as anthropoi, as human beings. It's no longer the rational, immaterial soul. Soul and body are non-two categorically separate entities, but what we used to refer to as soul has come about due to evolutionary processes, is not something immaterial. So the post-human is really an embodied human being, and the attempt to describe human beings in this non-dualistic manner. And this is what the post-human in the critical post-humanist tradition stands for. Whereas the post-human in the transhumanist traditions always has to do with overcoming our current limitations. Overcoming our current limitations can mean a lot of different things. It can mean, no, we're still human beings, but we have at least one capacity which significantly goes beyond what currently living human beings are capable of doing. And that would mean maybe perceiving ultraviolet rays by means of, after genetic modifications. We would turn into a post-human, but we would still belong to the member of human species. Another possible option would be, we apply genetic modification, genome editing to human beings so that we can no longer interbreed with currently living human beings. Then we would also turn into a post-human, but we would no longer be part of the human species. And a different notion of the post-human would be someone who basically, established a brain computer interface and then gets uploaded to a hard drive. And that again is a different usage of the term post-human. So the term post-human in the transhumanist tradition has a lot of different meanings too. It can be a member of the human species, but with at least one very special capacity. It can be a member of a new species which has come about as a result of an evolutionary enhanced evolution from the human. It can be an uploaded personality, so a silicon-based personality uploaded to a hard drive. But it could also be actually be the result of a digital evolution. Maybe you can create an algorithm and then develop further into into a post-human. It doesn't have to be connected to the human. But these are terms of the post-human. They are being used. I'm rather critical of them, but in particular of the one like the digital evolution of creating an algorithm and then developing further. But I'm just saying, even within transhumanism, there are at least 4 different notions of the post-human which clearly must be distinguished from each other. So whenever we use the term post-human, then we always have to be extremely clear what do we actually mean by that, and specify that in the discourses. And together with James Hughes, the director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, in 2017, I established the Journal of Post-Human Studies. And the great variety of different meanings can actually be clarified in this journal. That's the goal of the journal. And it's open to transhumanist submissions as well as to submissions by critical posthumanism. And it's actually the first, proper academic publication. It's double-blind, peer-reviewed. It comes out in print as well as online by by Penn State University Press. I invite everyone to submit, your reflections to the journal, and there by, the notion, the great variety of notions will get further, will get clearer.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we will put the links in the description for everyone interested in this new journal. In a TED Talk, you mentioned that you've studied Nietzsche extensively. So does Nietzsche led to your interest in transhumanism, or can we say in some ways Nietzsche was a proto-transhumanist, or not at all?
Exactly. No, I started reading Nietzsche at the age of 13. And I basically read all of his major writings by the age of 20. And it is his way of thinking, his philosophical approach, which strongly informed my own way of thinking. And I think so, yes. I think, Nietzsche was the only philosopher who really took seriously the notion of evolution seriously. And he actually engaged with Darwin's thinking in a proper manner. And he was critical of Darwin because, according to him, he was critical of Darwin not because of the evolutionary aspect of his thinking, but because Darwin thought it's just a struggle for survival. And according to Nietzsche, it's not just a means of survival. If it was a means of, if everyone was just struggling to survive, then no one would commit suicide. That we actually aim for something else. We aim for a specific feeling, which makes us feel special, which makes us feel, he uses the term will to power, but it's not related to political power. So why Nietzsche criticizes Darwin, it's not because he's an evolutionary thinker, because Nietzsche clearly embraces evolutionary thinking, and he embraces a naturalist understanding of who we are as human beings. We're fully part of this world, of the sensually accessible world. What he criticizes Darwin for is that we all just fight to survive, that we all just want to, all we want is to stay alive. And staying alive, according to Nietzsche, is not sufficient. We want something else. We strive, according to him, we strive for power, for the feeling of being superior to others. And power is definitely a very important goal of what many people strive for. But I'm also at the same time quite critical of that aspect of Nietzsche's thinking. So power, I don't think everything can be just reduced to power. Power is a very significant element. By stressing the importance of Nietzsche's thinking for my own approach, my metahumanist approach, my weak transhumanist approach, does not mean that I'm fully in agreement with Nietzsche. But whenever I turn to challenging philosophical issues, I usually turn to Nietzsche first because he was an extremely critical thinker. And he makes me sort of challenge my own prejudices and makes me think, well, is it actually plausible what I've held all along for a long time? And maybe I need to go beyond that. Maybe my own prejudices are just the result of the encrusted structures in which I was brought up in. And it must be noted that many of the encrusted structures in which we live, and we in Europe, we in the Western world live, do have their origin in this Christian Kantian way of thinking, which has a lot of problematic discriminatory implications, problematic because they are paternalistic. It is transhumanism which actually breaks away from that in the same way as Nietzsche's thinking has broken away from this dualistic binary way of thinking and has taken evolution seriously. And so Nietzsche is a permanent reference point for whenever problematic, challenging issues come up. And they're permanently new problematic issues because new technologies get developed. Many of them challenge our most fundamental understanding of who we are as human beings, challenge some of our most firmly rooted prejudices. And so it is important to confront these prejudices and try to find better answers. But that's not so easy to do, because basically this paradigm shift, which is occurring as a consequence of evolutionary naturalistic thinking now becoming more and more plausible, is really tackling all aspects of our life world, all the prejudices, all the insights, the premises on which our thinking have rested on for 2,000 years, need to be challenged. And that's why it is so difficult for many people today to embrace transhumanism. That's why many people regard transhumanism as the most dangerous idea in the world. And I can understand that, because their thinking is informed, is rooted in a way of thinking which has a 2,000-year long history. And that's why I think it's so important to think carefully about the various implications, because the proper or better answers, or revised answers, are not so easy to find. And that's why it's also important to promote this way of thinking in academia, at universities, and not only like in the public. It's important to do to both. So yeah, the answer and what we aim for and what we will achieve in the future is very difficult. And so a lot of careful thinking is needed, but that's why also there's still a lot of hostility towards transhumanism. But I think we all are doing our best in order to show that it's not the idea, or it's not the worry which many people have. It's like this blood-sucking vampires from Silicon Valley are taking over. That's not the proper way of conceptualizing transhumanism.
Let's speak about concrete aspects of transhumanism in a field, maybe in the first field, longevity, immortality, and more precisely, immortality and health. So you have a very interesting theory about how and why sharing health data could be good for health, of course, but also for freedom. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, this is actually one of my most important tasks, which I'm trying to promote, because there's such a strong hostility concerning sharing health data, digital data, in particular in Europe. And I think that's really undermining our most firmly rooted interest. Firstly, a short comment sort of to the notion immortality, and you rightly already stressed sort of it's not really immortality, because immortality cannot even be properly conceptualized. And that's why I'm quite hesitant that whenever sort of transhumanists use the term immortality, because immortality, normally it could mean two things. Either it is impossible for you to die, or that you do not have to die, that in principle you could continue living forever and forever. And forever would mean not only 6 billion years, but 15 billion years and more. And that's just not, that's just not a plausible stance. If we, imagine the future of the cosmos, the future of the universe, if it came out as a consequence of the Big Bang, then it might eventually lead, to a still stand of the entire universe. We couldn't survive that. Or it might lead to the collapse of the entire universe towards a cosmological singularity. And we, even as uploaded minds, we just couldn't survive that. So, it's not immortality which we should aim for. However, no, but living long, healthily, an expanded health span. This is, if you ask people and whether they would want to stay alive longer, then quite a few people are hesitant at first, because they are worried of getting older, they're worried of getting ill. But then if you tell them, well, but your body is not becoming dysfunctional, you're staying healthy at the same time, then it's an entirely different thing. Then actually, it's more than 90% in all the psychological studies, which you find out that people identify an increased health span, and that's what health span stands for. And it's not the lifespan, not just the lifespan, it's an increased health span. Then the majority of people think, no, this is actually beneficial for the quality of our lives. It might be intrinsically beneficial. It might be directly connected to a good life. It might be instrumentally beneficial, but in some way, living longer healthily is relevant and promotes the likelihood of us living good lives. And I think this really this ought to be taken seriously politically, because it's shared by the majority of human beings. And the question is, how can we do this? How can we promote an increased health span best? In order to make predictions, we need to have information. Where do we get the information from? Is from digital data. And the digital data, any kind of data is important. But nowadays we can get extremely precise information by means of a permanent investigation a digital investigation. It used to be the case that one thought by means of digitalization, one could never replace a physician. For example, of detecting tumors, of detecting cancer cells. Nowadays, it's clear that even the visual aspect, that even picture recognition, detecting a malignant tumor, detecting cancer can be done more reliable by a specific algorithm than by a trained physician. And this shows something. This shows the enormous potential which we have by using digital data. But that's just one very, minor example. We have so many more different possibilities. In particular, if we realize the correlations which happen within our body and our actions and our genes with respect to, or by the drugs we take, our behavior, and how it affects our health, how it affects our, the blood sugar level, whether we get Alzheimer, whether we get Parkinson. We need to investigate that. We need to investigate how do our genes affect our behavior, affect our diseases? How do the drugs we take affect our body? And how does our environment increase the likelihood of us getting a specific disease? And the best way we can do this is basically by finding out correlations between our behavior, between our genes, between the drugs we take, and then basically the consequences it has on our body, how it affects our health. The more information we have, the more we can interact. The ideal thing would really to get a couple of chips into our bodies at the time when we were born in various parts of the body, and to have a permanent body monitoring from when we were born on, and then the information gets collected. We get a genetic analysis at that time. We see how genes, we see how our environment and how our own action affect the likelihood of getting ill. And the more people we have that data, the more precisely we can find out what the appropriate correlations are and how risky certain behavior is. And then it gets analyzed by means of, deep learning, by means of eventually quantum computers. And then we can find very precise information concerning these various aspects, genes and our health, behavior and our health, and then we can influence it. And then we can influence in various ways. One option where influence is already possible is by means of selecting fertilized eggs after in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. That's already a possibility. So once we know that certain genes, lead to super longevity, parents who use in vitro fertilization could already select these specific fertilized eggs for implantation. And now we're getting better at genome editing. And as a consequence, we use CRISPR-Cas9 and other genome editing techniques for really bringing about the specific traits, genetic traits, in order to improve our health span, reduce the likelihood of getting cancer, Parkinson, Alzheimer, and all the other serious diseases. And so there's a need for us to collect these data. But unfortunately, there's an enormous hesitation to do so, because, in particular in Europe, and because they think if we allow the collection of digital data, we would lose our freedom. And that's the central worry which is being widely shared in Europe. This is not a worry that US Americans have so much. This is definitely not a worry which is widely shared in China. And they're actually realizing the data collection, which again has a lot of economic implications too. And what I'm trying to show is, no, there is not a necessary connection between giving up your digital data and losing freedom. That's just false. We can give up our digital data. I mean, I'm not saying it has to be false. I mean, if the political structures are such that the digital data, that people with a totalitarian mindset with a paternalistic mindset have access to this digital data, then actually no, there is risk of really bad political structure, of a totalitarian regime of an unprecedented scale. But it's not the collection of digital data per se which leads to these problematic structures. What we need to fight for, what we need to take care of, that we don't allow paternalistic totalitarian structures to come about. And the data could be collected, for example, by a European government who takes care of personal rights, who's a democratic government. And then the data could be processed primarily by algorithms. So the right of access to digital data should primarily be held by algorithms. And because algorithms can be programmed such that, as long as humans don't have access to these data, or the access to humans is strictly limited, then the risk of abuse is minimal. And we can benefit enormously from these digital data, because this is what I started off with. We need the data to making any types of predictions concerning an increased health span. And the more digital data we have concerning genes, environment, how we interact, which drugs we take, which pharmaceuticals we take, the more information we have, over personalized information which we have over long lifespan, the more detailed and the more precise the information, the more precise information we have concerning making changes and realizing an increased health span. And that's, I think, something which we all want. So we need to realize that giving up the digital data does not have to lead to a loss of freedom. We just need to make sure we don't live in a paternalistic totalitarian system. And we need to make sure that digital data is primarily processed by algorithms. And then we can have the enormous benefits of digital data collection. This is sort of the reflection on the meaning of digital data is probably the most important issue which we ought to focus on when it comes to digitalization nowadays. And it's particularly relevant for Europe because here the Data Protection Act is so strong, or the hesitation to give up digital data is so strong, it really undermines our most fundamental interest in so many different ways, concerning the possibility of increasing our health span, but also on different economic and political aspects which are being undermined. So not collecting digital data is really, I think, is enormously risky, because it would undermine the possibility of making research in the field of increasing the human health span, firstly, but it also undermines our possibilities in competing with the United States and China. And that has political implications, because it seems to be that China is sort of the best fitted for collecting digital data, because they can force everyone to give up their data. And by focusing on privacy, and as we do with the GDPR, as we do in Europe, does not mean we are the moral ones. We are the ones who really have the bright future. Actually, it undermines even the risk of it undermines the democratic structures, because if we don't collect the data, then the data and the benefits of the data will be used by China, and that has really dangerous implications. Data is the new oil, is widely being said, is widely being upheld. Well, digital data is not a natural resource, is not a natural substance as is oil. So oil, but digital data is an intellectual property. So digital data and oil cannot simply be identified, but both have the same function, the function of being connected to power, to well-being, to flourishing. And so in that sense, it is true that data is the new oil. But if China is collecting the data and they're using it not only, in order to promote their research, political decision makings, and scientific research, but they also make a lot of money with it, and they're already expanding in various countries in Africa and so on with the new Silk Road. That also has, that has war implication. With having more money, they can invest more in military, and by investing more in military, they can expand their political structures, their more paternalistic structures in a political system, which means, and with us in Europe not having these financial possibilities, which means, well, liberal democracies, social liberal democracies, as we have that in Europe, by focusing on privacy, we would lose our political stance, and China would take over much more than it has already done. So for various reasons, the political ideals which we uphold by focusing on privacy is highly dangerous for the future of Europe.
When I would say 30 years ago, an idea of democratic people was we have to share more knowledge, we have to be more together. And at the moment, it's kind of a paradoxical situation where people say, oh no, sharing data is not good. So I think it's also something that you can say in terms of democratic progression, that sharing things is a positive aspect. And when you are saying we don't share health data in Europe at the moment, actually we collect health data, but this health data is going to private companies or sometimes also to public companies, but it's not shared. But however, the projects of the European Union at the moment concerning the European health data space are going more or less in this direction, with one important point. It would be prohibited to use the data for, let's say, private interests. So I think this would be positive. Do you have something to say about what you know about the European health data space? And also, maybe I want to say, China, of course, is not a democratic country and so on, but they have also their own regulations concerning privacy. But this doesn't apply to the state and to the Communist Party. But yeah.
Firstly, of course, you're right. It's not that it's not being collected in Europe at all. It's just that the GDPR makes the collection much more difficult than it does in other parts of the world. And yes, the other what you mentioned concerning 30 years ago, sort of the importance of sharing. This is something which could also be which could also be supplemented just by reference to our genetic makeup. We need to understand each individual. There are only very few genes which make up us as a specific individual. The majority of genes among human beings is shared. And we've got we're sharing 50% of our genes with bananas. We're sharing up to 97, 98. It depends on the study with great apes. And with another human, we're sharing even further, genetic information. And even, with our closest relatives, parents, siblings, the majority of our genes are being shared. And this shows, there is a common heritage. There's a shared, and there's a shared interest, and maybe even a shared property in this way. So whose property is this information concerning concerning the digital data concerning our genetic information? So I'm usually asking that to my students. So let's assume you've gone to one of these analyzing companies, 23andMe, any other company, and you're having a genetic analysis. And you're someone who wants to promote scientific research. You've got some very interesting finding, and you sense, I'm going to place the results of my gene test on the internet. I'm going to reveal it. I want to share it. I want to promote scientific research. Do you have the right to do so? Well, and many would reply, well, it's information about myself. I paid for the analysis. It's my genetic information. It's my intellectual property. I have the right to share that. But then, on the other hand, you could wonder, well, actually, you're sharing the majority of your genes with your sister, and your sister. It might not be in your sister's interest that you are sharing this genetic information on the internet, because maybe there is a certain genetic defect which you find there, and that could affect the likelihood of her getting further employment and of, or of an insurance company taking her on board if they find that information. So that this is sort of the challenge when it comes to the intellectual property rights concerning your genetic data. And that's why I think a more fundamental rethinking needs to be done than what is currently occurring in Europe, because it's not just sufficient, to have some selected groups. We really need a more basic shift concerning collecting the data, of all people, of everyone, because the more information we have, the more reliable we can make these predictions and understanding how the correlations occur. And this is what China is doing. They've started to be doing. In order to be competitive politically, that's an important part, but it needs to be really a more political shift to including the data from all the citizens, from all the people living in the European Union, and making the arrangement such that people don't have to worry that the information is being abused by insurance companies, by future employers. So I don't think by simply tweaking specific aspects of the current system is a sufficient way of finding an appropriate structure. Really some more fundamental paradigm shift concerning how we want to deal with and to find a proper approach, both for using the data concerning health research, but also for being able to deal economically with the other big powers in the world. And so where data concerning the interactions, genetic data really becomes part of, like our identity cards. We get a chip implanted directly after birth, with our genetic information, with our health information being stored, making accessible to the doctors. How we lived becomes automatically stored. How we interacted. This all gets saved. A completely different way of dealing with digital data collection and being much more open to this digital data collection.
And regarding maybe other aspects of transhumanism, what are the, maybe not to do a big list, but other great ethical challenges regarding transhumanism and emerging technologies?
Sort of three elements. Three rights seem to be particularly relevant: the right of morphological freedom, the right of reproductive freedom, and the right of educative freedom. And so that has a lot of different implications concerning the usage of technologies. Some of the challenges is like when it comes to cultural understandings, we still got this binary way, and I stressed that before when I talked about post-humanism. So we still got that binary way of under conceptualizing what is relevant, binary ways of understanding marriage, for example. Luckily, we've moved away from that understanding that marriage is just a bond between a man and a woman. Now it's sort of we've more and more people and more states and countries have embraced what they say marriage for all. But marriage for all is not actually marriage for all. It is marriage still limited to two people. Why should marriage be reduced to two people? And in Colombia, they've already allowed 3 people to get married. In Colombia, there were 3 men who wanted to get married, and they were granted the right to get married. And that is connected to transhumanism too, because by means of new technologies, we now have the possibilities of having a child with 3 biological parents. And we already have had, children have come about in this way in the US, but also in the UK. So far, it's only possible to have a child with 3 biological parents with 2 women and 1 man. And it's only the case in the UK, for example, it's only the case if the women have a specific mitochondrial defect, a specific defect in their egg cell, which basically leads to the child, dying really fast after being conceptualized. So that's the only reason for them using these technologies. But why should the technology of having a child with 3 biological parents not be used by a lesbian couple? Why should the right, why should their technology, which is a reliable technology, not be used by 2 women and men who basically love each other, who say, no, we want to be together? And then there's a reliable technology in having a biologically related child. And this is also a way of, thinking about what marriage means in a society. Marriage is not sort of this natural Christian Thomistic ideal of, one man and one woman getting united. But marriage is a contract. You could say it's a contract that we love each other, but important also that we financially, we agree to financially support each other. We want to stay together. And why is that in the interest of a society? Well, it's in the interest of a political system because it guarantees its security, a certain type of stability to the society. And that's why it's in the interest of a political system. Furthermore, if one of the partners, partners, not meaning of the various partners who agree to get married, becomes broke, loses his or her job, has no longer the possibility to sustain him or herself, then in that case, it is the duty of the government to support that person. Once you're part of a marriage, and a marriage, being open to 3, 4, 5 more people, then it's the duty of the marriage partners to financially support the others. And basically, this is another reason why it's in the interest of a government to refine, to redefine what a marriage is all about. So here we've got a technological possibility of having a child with 3 biological parents, which also implies some cultural challenges, implies a need to refine our, cultural understanding of limiting the marriage to 2 people and opening up the possibility to, 3 and more people. That's, just one specific element which shows why transhumanism is such a paradigm shift from how we traditionally conceptualized one of the, the institution of marriage. But obviously, when it comes to educative freedom, reproductive freedom, morphological freedom, it just the implication and possibilities are myriad, and they challenge our most fundamental understandings of how the Western world has conceptualized themselves. But that one example should be sufficient just to show the enormous vastness of implications transhumanism offers. But because it's such a radical paradigm shift, we need to be careful. We cannot establish all at once, but we need to make aware people of the importance of these implications, and in particular when it comes to health span. I think this is something which ought to be taken, seriously on a political level immediately. We shouldn't just treat cancer, Parkinson, and Alzheimer's. We should continue research in this field. But if we successfully manage to undo aging, if we successfully manage to promote, to deal with the dysfunctionalities of our cells, which are responsible for making our hair turn gray, for our wrinkles to appear, because these are all the dysfunctionalities in our cells, which then lead to Parkinson, Alzheimer, cancer. And if we successfully manage to undo them, then we have the possibility of radically increasing our health span, by 30 years, rather than just by another 5 years if we successfully treat one specific disease. And so this is something where many more investments and interests on a political level are needed.
Coming actually to very concrete things. I heard you during another interview speaking about concerning the ways to rejuvenate humans in the future. You spoke about transfer of genes from animals having good capacities for rejuvenation, and you spoke also specifically about axolotls. Can you elaborate? Because I was trying to find information and I couldn't.
Oh, yeah, the axolotl is a very fascinating animal, because, they can basically replace entire body parts. Once they become dysfunctional, they can be regenerated. again and again. And that is just an enormous special capacity. And it recently has been shown that actually some of these capacities have been successfully transferred to another species. So it works, sort of the transfer of capacity from one species to another species in principle works. Obviously, if we do this to a human, the issue becomes much more complex, and we cannot expect that to happen within the next 3 or 5 years. However, in principle, it is possible. So if it works between two species, in principle, it works between other species as well. And that's why I think the research, the potential of the research also has become clear with the recent achievements concerning human-animal hybrids. I mean, it initially started in the US. No, it initially started in the UK with creating human-animal hybrids. Which they allowed them to survive for 14 days because of the unclear, problematic moral status of human-animal hybrids. They had to be killed after 14 years. Then in the US, they allowed them to develop for 30 days to make fundamental research on human-animal hybrids. And now recently in Japan, they allowed the research to take place to create human-animal hybrids and then to give birth to them, to see, well, what will actually be the case if we allow, a human-pig hybrid to be born. Which capacities would that entity have? How should we classify it? We don't know. We don't know unless we actually see what the entity will look like. And what I found particularly fascinating was what Martine Rosblatt realized, her company realized at the beginning of this year. I mean, she's been doing research on that for more than a decade. It deals with the potential, potentialities of xenotransplantation. So what she's done, what her company has done, is to realize a human pig hybrid, and here with respect to the pigs, with respect to the heart, and not even. What she did was not even specific for the person to whom the heart had to be transplanted, because the FDA regulations are always such that, well, in order for the procedure to have a genetically modified pig's heart transplanted into a human, being approved by FDA, which is a responsible institution in the US, because it's such a risky endeavor at the beginning, the state of the person had to be really bad that he or she is expected to die within the next couple of days, weeks. And so one couldn't really predict when the person is going to be dead in order to specifically target or to specifically create a genetically modified pig's heart for that specific person. So like a general purpose genetic modification had to occur. And this is what her company did. And the genetically modified pig's heart was transplanted into the human, and he survived for more than 2 months. Transplant was actually successful, and it was not that the organ became dysfunctional, but it was simply a part of related to the pig cell, which then at the end caused the death of the human. So in principle, it does work, and that's just a wonderful achievement. It shows, there are hundreds and thousands of people in the US alone which are in need of a transplant. So here, by means of a slightly revised version of the genetically modified pig's heart, we've already got the possibility to save hundreds and thousands of people in the US alone. Beside that, in all the world, there are millions of people who are in need of that. This shows one possibility where we've even one proven, success with respect to the genetically modified pig's heart. But furthermore, there are other capacities. The axolotl genome, the axolotl is a particularly intriguing animal because basically it's the possibility to regenerate entire organs. And so once we found out which genes are particularly responsible for the regeneration of an entire organ, and we can transplant, we can identify the genes, we can extract the genes, and then integrate the genes by means of genome editing into the human, then we wouldn't even have to need to to create genetically modified pigs are at first, well, then we could directly realize the genetic modifications in human beings. So here, this is what I see as a extremely realistic option within the forthcoming decade, in order to establish some amazing breakthrough concerning the expansion of the human health span. And the third step would be, well, there are animals like there's the Greenland whale who lives more than 200 years. Well, once we can identify the genes for longevity for increased health span for these animals, and we can transfer them then to humans as well, then we can also significantly go beyond the 120 years, which seem to be the maximum life expectancy currently we can have based on our current genetic makeup. So the 120 years don't have to be the maximum, and we can significantly go beyond that. I think that's extremely promising, and we've got good reasons for regarding that as plausible possibilities.
So we are reaching the end of the podcast. There is one question I'd like to ask you. Maybe Didier would want also to ask another question. But is there something that we could call human nature, or something in us that we would want to preserve as we start, changing, evolving, using technological progress?
I mean, human nature, the term philosophically has referred to something essential. There's something human which is essential, which is unchanging. It's usually referred to our rationality, free will, the divine spark, something which is non-material. Everything in this world, everything which is material, which is essentially accessible, is permanently subject to change, is permanently undergoing some kind of modifications. That doesn't mean everything's changing radically all at once, but everything's subject to change. Or the last common ancestors with great apes have lived 6 million years ago. We've only come about, or Homo sapiens have only come about like 400,000 years ago. And so in 300,000 years, 6 million years, it's clear that the Homo sapiens, the human Homo sapiens Homo sapiens will no longer be here. The changes are usually gradual ones. The traditional concept of human nature as something which stands for something unchanging, which always remains the same in an essentialist manner, that we have to give that up. That's highly implausible, because it has to refer to some non-material realm where some divine gift remains unchanged. That's just not, we don't have any good evidence for that. But everything which we see, which we experience here, is just in the permanent process of becoming, of continual change. And therefore, we don't have any plausible reasons for upholding any fixed human nature. That with a permanent becoming, continual becoming, that has many radical implications concerning norms, values, morality, concerning fixed entities, cultural entities, marriage, what we want in society. And that's what makes it so challenging for many people to accept. But on the other hand, it also gives us the possibility of free development, of being creative, of creating new possibilities. And that's what's fascinating. And I can understand the fear which many people have, but instead of focusing on the fear, I think we should focus on the possibilities. We also have the possibility of successfully dealing with these dysfunctionalities, of successfully dealing with the diseases, of successfully dealing with our limitations, of the human maximum life expectancy. And that, and by focusing on these possibilities, I think we can see, now let's give it a try. Rather than focusing on the precautionary principle, we should focus on the proactive principle. Been very successful in the past 200 years of increasing our life expectancy, increasing our health span, increasing also the quantity of people who live in absolute poverty in all parts of the world. It used to be more than 90% of the world's population who lives in absolute poverty. If we focus on emerging technologies, if we focus on, the quality of life, on hygiene, on clean water, access to pharmaceuticals, and using new technologies for doing so, then, in the past 200 years, we've managed to get down the absolute poverty rate to about 10% all over the world. And that's a wonderful achievement. And by focusing on these types of elements, we can have positive benefits for our individual life, quality of life, for social justice all over the world. And that's the only way of also, successfully dealing with such tricky issues as climate change and more global issues. The only possible way is focusing on a technological solution, such that people embrace it anyway, that we willingly we would choose the option because it goes along with what is in our interest. And we need to move away from this paternalistic and totalitarian system, which tells everyone how they should act. But if we have a technological innovation which works and which provides people with the benefits they are interested in, they would choose it in a liberal democratic society. And then we can successfully manage to deal with the global issues with which we are confronted with. It's the aspect of technological innovation which can save us and which can increase our likelihood of living good lives. And I think the developments in the past, and particularly 200 years, have clearly demonstrated that this is the case.
Thank you, Stefan, for this great discussion and advocacy for sharing health data and for progressing through technological progress. We had no time to speak about many things, especially, that's funny, but we didn't speak at all about COVID situation. So maybe you have last thing to add, and maybe about other aspects about your last book, We Have Always Been Cyborgs.
I think a lot of information can be found on my website, www.musike.de. And actually, the book We Have Always Been Cyborgs is no longer my most recent book. It came out early in 2022, but actually just like last week or the week before, my book Philosophy of Post-Human Art was published. So I've published 2 monographs in 2022, one dedicated to the ethics of transhumanism and the other one dedicated to the philosophy of art of transhumanism. And so the philosophy of post-human art deals with the entire realm of artistic implications of the post-human. We've Always Been Cyborgs is dedicated to the ethics of transhumanism. And here I deal in great detail also with the COVID crisis. So whoever's interested, do read this book. Here you find the cover of that book. It's out currently as a hardback, as a digital version, but it will also be out in the very near future in a soft cover, in a paperback edition. So it becomes more widely accessible. It becomes cheaper. And the title is actually extremely important. It's extremely important for making people realize that we don't have to be afraid of the emerging technologies of genetic modification, brain-computer interfaces, or also digitalization. By realizing that we've always been cyborgs, that's a sort of a move away from the traditional understanding, that we are something outside of the world. It is the realization that we've always used technologies in order to improve the quality of our lives. The cyborg is a cybernetic organism. A cybernetic comes from the ancient Greek term kybernetes, who is the helmsman, the steersperson of the ship. And so a cyborg is a steered organism. And I'm saying we've always been steered, we've always been altered organisms, which means, well, how do we develop language? We develop language not because we received the divine spark at the time of fertilization. We do have our organic prerequisites for developing a language, but then, we only develop language once our parents, teachers make us get confronted, once our cultural circumstances make us become aware and teach us language. So after we were born, it's an upgrade. learning language is a technology which we integrate as part of who we are, into part of our organisms. So we are upgraded beings, we are upgraded organisms. That's what it means to be a cyborg. We are steered, we are upgraded organisms, and our parents, our cultural circumstances are responsible for upgrading us. And then we going to school is just a continuous upgrading processes. We develop mathematical skills, scientific skills, further technological skills. And so the important thing, we define us as, the linguistic animal, the animal which is capable of using language. But language is an upgrade, is a technological upgrade. And so by realizing that, by realizing that the most important features which we have, which enable us to make a planning, which enable us to create these technologies, is already technology in itself. And once we realize that, well, all the latest technologies, genome editing, gene technology, other gene technologies, brain-computer interfaces, as well as digitalization, they are just further possibilities to enhance evolution, to break beyond the boundaries of our current limitations. And that's why, I can hardly wait for a post-human future to occur. And let's be open to these new emerging technologies.
Thank you very much. We definitely share this optimism and this idea of embracing the future with obviously being aware of the pitfalls. Okay, so great. We will put all the links in the description again of your work, your books. And thanks again for participating to this podcast with us.
Many thanks for that wonderful discussion. Have a wonderful day.
Merci d'avoir suivi ce podcast jusqu'au bout. Si vous avez aimé cette conversation, je vous invite à aller regarder nos autres podcasts, la série Humain demain et la série La Prospective, mais aussi notre vidéo sur la chaîne YouTube. Et vous pouvez nous soutenir à la fois financièrement, mais aussi mentalement, juste émotionnellement, je dirais même, en partageant nos contenus et en aimant, en donnant des petites revues, commentaires. Tout ça, ça nous aide toujours à nous faire voir avec les algorithmes. C'est toujours un petit peu comme ça que ça marche. Voilà. En attendant, je vous dis bonne journée, bonne soirée. Et on se retrouve pour un prochain épisode très bientôt. Ciao, ciao.
Le podcast
Humain demain.